Hello,
All right.
welcome.
We made it.
We are here. I know. Without Katie to wrangle the cats, it's amazing that we were able to get
Exactly. Well, she's off getting chased by like rabid squirrels in the woods.
fighting bear in the rain, I would imagine. So, yeah. So we're here today, though, covering our topic. We're talking about Cloudflare. So I've got a bunch of questions we can serve up to you about that. But this is So What, the Trust Insights podcast. You can check us out over at Trust Insights AI. We're always talking about what's happening, and the biggest thing is getting in a little bit deeper, talking about, so what, why does this stuff matter? And so with that, yeah, what is Cloudflare? Tell us about Cloudflare.
Well, let's take a step back. So as marketers, particularly as marketing technologists, one of the things that we've got to do is constantly try to make our marketing tech, like our websites, function better. There have been companies and technologies for a while that have done things to accelerate your website, reverse caching and proxying and stuff like that, that essentially have, if you imagine your website is sort of at the bottom layer, and then there's a customer browsing the web at the top, for them to directly connect to your website can be, 15 or 16 jumps across the internet, the way the internet works, to get to your website. There are companies, Cloudflare is an example one, Akamai is another. Akamai is technically actually a client of Trust Insights, which is slightly awkward. And these companies are called content delivery networks, and that essentially sit between your website and the customer, essentially make a copy of a lot of your stuff. And then because they have data centers all around the world, when a customer goes to your website, they actually go to the nearest data center and they see that version instead of what's actually on your website. So instead of going 15 or 16 jumps to the internet, it's maybe 3 or 4. So they get a much faster, better experience. Now, companies like Akamai and Cloudflare and stuff, what they do is they also provide a lot of additional services. So they do what's essentially called DNS interception. DNS stands for domain name system, and it turns a URL like trustinsights.ai into a numeric address. And that numeric address is our physical server. With a service like Cloudflare, what it does is it says, hey, when an inquiry for trustinsights.ai comes in, I have permission to intercept it. And instead of getting it to the Trust Insights server, I'm going to take it to my data center and serve the customer our copy of the site. So that means that they can block things like hostile bots, known bots that are just trying to inject spam traffic into your website, or looking for backdoors and really obvious security precautions that for a lot of businesses, they are not equipped to handle. So like, for example, my martial arts teacher, his website, he's a sole proprietor. He's an amazing, wonderful, outstanding martial arts teacher. He is not a marketing technologist. He is not going to be adminning his server anytime soon. So for someone like him, having a service like Cloudflare that intercepts a lot of that crap is a huge win for him.
Yeah, and now, so I get that there's that idea that, you've got your website, and normally if it was on one server, just all the traffic would be pouring to that one server. And if it was traffic, say, from Singapore, and it has to come all the way to Dallas, that's a huge jump. So you get something like Cloudflare where, the Singapore query goes maybe even just to Singapore and gets the copy of your site, and it comes back. But how about talking about the bad actors? What are some other security things that can get taken care of then? Are there other, additional, is this basically a firewall?
It kind of is. The other reason I think we should probably give some context about is why we're talking about this at all. We were processing Scott Brinker's Martech 9000, the list of the top marketing technologies used, the top 9,000 marketing technology companies. And in this analysis, what marketing technology companies use, when we look at the top services, obviously Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager are at the head of the list. There's WordPress, Salesforce, and Facebook ads. And then there's Cloudflare. It is one of the most popular technologies for technology companies themselves, big or small, for managing the complexity of essentially being on the internet these days and having highly available websites. So yeah, it is a bit like a firewall. It is a lot like a reverse proxy or a caching server, which are, again, those are sites, tools that make copies of your website and put copies closer to your customers.
Yeah, and then so as far as what marketers are looking for, like which of these features, are obviously the site speed and getting closer are huge things. But what else is there? Other stuff that you can take advantage of with this?
There's a ton of stuff. So let's actually dig into what is inside of Cloudflare. And there's obviously a huge tree of things. Generally speaking, for marketing purposes, we want a fast site, we want a secure site, and we want to make it easier for other marketing technologies to interact with us. So we'll start real simple in here with, let's start with security. If you want, you can create all kinds of rules to help the administration of your site. For example, you can block certain, if there's like hostile traffic from known sources, or you want to set up security tunnels so that you can admin, the raw servers themselves. You can do all that in the security section. There's not a ton in here for marketers, but one of the things that I think is an important caution, marketing probably should not be administering Cloudflare. This is probably best done by your IT department in collaboration with you. That's true for any of these technologies.
Yeah, this is totally web admin, realm.
Exactly. With access, same thing. You can control who gets access to your site. Where we start getting into the marketing stuff is in the speed section, right? So if you want, you can pay to have your images compressed. Cloudflare is free, but obviously for some of the good stuff, you do want to maybe pay for the upgrades. Reducing and compressing some of the source code, like JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, that's an easy win. If you go to something like Google's PageSpeed Insights tool, it will tell you, like, hey, you've got a lot of really overweight JavaScript code on your site. Maybe you should consider compressing it. And a service like Cloudflare does that. Same for compression. This is new here. This is called Early Hints, that allows browsers to download components faster. So if you go to trustinsights.ai, on that page, there's like 300 different things. There's images, there's text, there's scripts, there's all sorts of stuff. And modern web browsers are capable of downloading stuff out of order and then sort of reassembling it, which is kind of nice. But you want to be able to, make sure to turn that on so that, again, for the end user, it feels snappy. Like it feels like it's coming together fast. If you look in Google Search Console, which is, by the way, we have a paid course for that. I should probably find the banner link for the Search Console course. One of the things that Search Console looks at is stuff like first contentful paint. It's part of what's called the core web vitals. And that means how long does it take between someone typing in your site's URL and the first thing they see? When you turn on stuff like optimized delivery, like Early Hints, it helps make that faster, which improves your core web vitals, because Google doesn't have special access to your web server. Google crawls your website the same way that a user does. So they will interact with Cloudflare instead of directly with your web server. So if you have stuff like this turned on, now you're making your site more appealing to Googlebot. And then that can improve your core web vitals, which improves your search rankings. All right, let's keep digging down here. Again, there's a lot of optimizations. Some things like improving paint time with Rocket Loader. Again, this is where you're going to want to collaborate with IT and probably your web designer. Some of these settings, if you don't know what they do, they can break your website. So it's good to know those what things do and don't work. So there's a lot to be had there in optimization. There's a lot of stuff in caching. So again, caching is when you make a copy, Cloudflare makes copies of your website all around the internet, and then it stores that. And then when you, say, put up a new blog post, if you've got the integration set up, the first time somebody tries to access that post, Cloudflare will retrieve it and distribute copies to all their data centers, and then every subsequent request will be served up from the copy until it expires. So there's, generally speaking, there's no reason not to turn on caching. Just crank that knob all the way up. This one is new, crawler hints. This is super important for SEO. This essentially helps Googlebot know what to crawl on your website and how often to come back. For small websites like the Trust Insights website, it's not a big deal, right? We don't have probably more than 10,000 pages on our site, so Googlebot can chew through it pretty quickly. If you're a big site like Amazon or eBay or something like that, or even just a large corporate site that you may have 100,000 pages or so, one of the things that can reduce your perceived value by Google is when Googlebot gets lost in your website, because it has a certain amount of time it's going to spend crawling pages before it has to move on to the next website in its queue. So something like Crawler Hint says, hey, here's only what's changed, right? Here's what's new. And so it can make your crawling super, super efficient, which in turn means that Googlebot sees more of your website and can correctly rank those pages, index those pages. And again, it's one of those things you want to turn on. And the other one is their always on service. So if your website goes down for some reason, it can serve up limited copies to a user, like a cached copy, in case while you fix things, which we've had to do from time to time to make repairs. That one's very, very helpful. Another thing, let's see, in the network settings. Now, again, this is IT territory, but pretty much most of the checkboxes in this section are things you'll want to turn on, because these enable multiple features that are important, like are you using the HTTP2 protocol? Are you using the HTTP3 protocol? Cloudflare, even if your web server doesn't do these things, because maybe you bought like some really cheap hosting, Cloudflare can speed that up. Okay, another couple things with the security section. You can do things like check the security level of your site, and you can enforce with encryption. You can enforce saying like always use HTTPS. So even on pages that might not be secure, you can have Cloudflare essentially serve them up as secure pages. And again, HTTPS usage is one of those things that Google looks for in Search Console. So if you are, if you've got stuff that's not secure, this will help lock it down and again make you appear more favorable in Google's eyes. The last section I think is very interesting and it's just brand new is something called Zaras. This is a new thing that they've got going where you can start to have certain types of code run on Cloudflare's platform instead of putting them on your website. Essentially, this is like a cloud-based version of Tag Manager, which is really interesting. It's an interesting play, but this would be appropriate for if you have a site where you have a custom domain name for it, like your headphone site, but maybe it goes to a site that you don't have access to the backend code. And you can't, there's no access to Tag Manager. You could effectively create a Tag Manager like layer on that custom URL and still be able to run Google Analytics, even if it's not a site you own, as long as the domain name is something that is part of it. So I thought that was a very interesting, relatively new addition to it. So that's what, in a nutshell, Cloudflare offers to marketers. It's the key things are make your site faster, make it more compliant with what services like Google especially are looking for, make it a lot more secure, and make things just run better.
Yeah, that's interesting too. So on the GA tool there, on the GA4 tool, is that actually going to set up Tag Manager in the cloud?
No, it doesn't set up Tag Manager. It just sets up your Google Analytics 4 tracking pixel.
Oh, okay. The tracking pixel gets laid there as opposed to on your own code.
Exactly. Now, yeah, here's the SSL stuff I was mentioning earlier. So you can say force always use HTTPS and a bunch of other things. One other thing that's interesting is you do get some level of analytics through Cloudflare, and I think that's kind of interesting. You can see request bandwidth, unique visitors. Be careful with this, who you let see this data, because these numbers will be wildly different than what is in your Google Analytics. And part of the reason for that is that this counts everything, including all the crap, the bots, the spammers, etc. If you want to see essentially what the raw usage of your website is, like this is what it looks like. So Trust Insights has had, in terms of raw trackable visitors, 71,000 visitors in the last 30 days. Google Analytics has about a quarter of that. And when you look, especially in the security section, in terms of total threats and then performance and stuff like that, a lot of that traffic is not necessarily good traffic. It's, you know, a lot of it appears to be spammy bots. So I suppose if you wanted to overstate how much traffic you get, you could use this data, but it's not going to match up even close to what's in Google Analytics.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy how it's that far out. But I know that is when you're doing server level tracking, you just get so much more junk and other crawlers and things like that the numbers get out of hand.
Exactly. And another new thing they have is being able to do a little bit of email routing. So it's like effectively, if you have a domain, but you need to set up aliases and you can't do that in your email system. I'm not sure why that would be the case. Maybe you bought some like super cheap hosting. You can create email aliases, you know, like marketing at trustinsights.ai, and have Cloudflare essentially reroute that mail to a different preferred mailbox. I think it's kind of a neat idea. It's certainly something that makes sense from a DNS perspective, but I would also argue if you're having to resort to things like this, you probably just need to upgrade your email hosting.
Yeah, well, that could be really weird too, because if you start making changes there, especially if you haven't looped IT in, and there could be weird things going on with, you know, having multiple layers of email admin that could get really ugly.
Yeah, definitely. The last section, of course, is probably the most complex, which is what Cloudflare originally started doing was just DNS management. So managing your domain name records. This is a section where, again, you need technical expertise. This is not the section to go playing around with, because you can accidentally just remove your site from the internet if you do things wrong, or just keep everyone from getting their email. However, this is also where you do a lot of advanced configuration for your site. So if you do email marketing and you're using a system like Pardot or HubSpot or Marketo or whatever, when you first do your onboarding, a lot of the time people will talk about in the onboarding, like, oh, you need to update your DNS records to allow HubSpot, for example, to be an authorized sender of trustinsights.ai. Otherwise, if it's not, when you send out an email from HubSpot, because HubSpot doesn't have authorization to use our domain, could be coming from JWall at trustinsights.ai, it would be coming from HubSpot IP, and a lot of email services would be like, this doesn't look right. This looks spam.
Spammy, yeah.
Exactly. You're trying to spoof it. You would essentially authenticate and say, yes, these HubSpot servers are permitted to send on behalf of trustinsights.ai. And that's what you do here. So a lot, you'll hear terms like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC protocols in email marketing. That's what's managed in here in the DNS, so that we are who we say we are on all of our different systems. I was talking to a friend the other day who's saying her email open rates when she changed providers went from 38% to 10%. I said, did you update your DNS records for the new provider? And she said, what's a DNS record? And I said, that's your problem. Your new provider basically is being seen as a spammer.
Yeah, and you can lose a whole chunk of your list. Now that's like horrible if you can get, if you get wiped out like that. Now, during the configuration, do you actually go in and just set up all your domains, and that's how this gets access to the DNS for them, or how does that all work?
Exactly. So you would let's show an example here. If I were to put in marketing over coffee here, which by the way we need to move on to Cloudflare, it's not currently. I'm going to choose the free version here. It will scan for your existing DNS records, and so it'll import everything as much as possible. And then from there, you would go and change the name service for marketing over coffee, wherever it is that you own them. I think it's on GoDaddy, and say, point this to Cloudflare instead.
Right. And okay, so Cloudflare is the first name server.
Right. So for example, this is pulling in these records already. I can tell there's an issue, and so we'll want to obviously make those changes in GoDaddy at some point. But the big issue is there's no email records provisioned for authentication. So every time you send out the Marketing Over Coffee newsletter, from whatever service you're sending it from, that service is being seen as a spammer.
Right. Well, so this is interesting, because we can talk about this because we've never kicked this around. But I've always been using themshow.com as the sending address, because I knew I would be doing a lot of screwy stuff with email, and I didn't want marketingovercoffee.com to take the hit in case I screwed something up. But what do you think? Is that the right way to go? I don't, because I had seen that done at a bunch of companies I've worked at too. A lot of them have, places that I've been actually have a different email domain for the email, just again, so that if somebody does something really stupid with email, you're not taking down the company's, main site.
Yeah, and that's a general best practice, especially for a larger company where, you would want to have, at the very least, an email subdomain, something like marketing.trustinsights.ai as your email domain. You don't have to keep it as a completely separate domain, and it's probably better if you don't. If it's probably better if it's all under one roof. But for smaller businesses, like a one-person show like Marketing Over Coffee, it for sure makes sense to just do everything in the same place, because the more legitimate email you send out, just in the course of business, the better your email reputation overall is.
All right, we'll give it another couple months since I just changed providers. I'll let all the crummy addresses work themselves out of the mix for a few weeks and then make the transition.
Oh no, I'd actually, so for you just moved to Ghost, so putting in those records, the Amex records for Ghost, is an essential thing to do before you hit the send button. Because if you don't, it's going to be really bad.
Yeah, right. No, if we were sending from an MOC address, that'd be end up in Block City.
Yep, exactly. So that's how this stuff works. Is it's very much heavy AI, heavy IT stuff behind the scenes to connect all the pipes, and that's essentially what you're doing, is just connecting all these different pipes into a place where you can make all this stuff work.
Now, how about, so you're showing all the admin over here, like this is getting the accounts up and running. What about as far as, adding it to your CMS or your website or your servers? Like how much work is that and what kind of work is that depending on the platform?
It depends on the platform. So for example, Cloudflare can work in front of any kind of web server, and you don't really need to put anything on the server itself for it to work. There are plugins, like it has a plugin for WordPress, so that when you publish a new post on WordPress, it automatically gets an update for its server. So it works a little bit better, a little bit faster. But one of the things that's nice about this kind of software is that you don't actually need it to integrate with the server in order for it to work well, which is good, because if the server goes away, then this can still continue to function for a little while.
Yeah, right. You can still have cached results show up. So it's sort of like maybe your e-commerce is broken, but at least like people can still read about the company. It doesn't look like you're dead in the water.
Exactly. So that's, I would say you need some kind of caching solution these days. It doesn't have to be Cloudflare. Like I said, there's a bunch of companies that do this stuff. Akamai is another one that's very popular. Akamai tends to be on the higher end, the more enterprise side. For like Marketing Over Coffee, you definitely would not use Akamai. For us, same for my martial arts teacher, it would just be sandblasting a soup cracker. But for big companies, it's Akamai is the better solution.
Yeah, and I have not had to research or buy any of this in years and years. But isn't Akamai, like if you're hosting video or you have huge, heavy bandwidth stuff, people would go to Akamai? Is that still the case, or is it not a big deal anymore? Has YouTube just made all those things go away?
YouTube's made some of it redundant for a lot of companies, but all of these companies now have the ability to cache media, to store media and forward it. It just depends on the size of the data centers, and like we were seeing with the Martech 9000, it's one of the biggest CDNs. There's Cloudflare, there's Akamai, there's Max CDN. Trying to remember who else is big in the mix, but there's a bunch of companies that all have those content networks where instead of having to serve up a 1 gigabyte video file over and over and over again, it's
Right.
It essentially just lets people get a copy of the data stream.
That makes sense. I don't know. Is there other stuff that users need to know about when they're walking through the admin or doing setup, or is it kind of more of a set it and forget it thing?
It's definitely not set it and forget it. It is one of those things that should be on your maintenance list. Once a month, go in and look at it, make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to. And, maybe there's new features that you might want to turn on, like the crawler budget stuff was something that's relatively new or is in beta. It's definitely not something that should be set it and forget it. And it's one of those things where you have to collaborate with IT, because otherwise they may do something at some point, for example, like change your name servers on your domain that points it away from Cloudflare, and then all that work you did setting up is meaningless because it's the traffic's not going there anymore.
Yeah, because it doesn't come through. No, that makes sense. And I know I do get, you can set up monthly reporting. Like I get an email that just says like, hey, X amount of bandwidth was, your servers didn't have to serve up. And two, for people that don't know too, for most hosting, you pay for the bandwidth. So if you're able to shunt off, and especially if it's stuff that's highly repetitive, like video files or whatever, you can significantly reduce your hosting costs on a monthly basis by having something, a cheaper source serve this up. Not only is it faster, it ends up being cheaper.
Yeah, the bot rejection is also really important too, because you've had sites who have gotten hit by bots and just run up your bill.
Yeah, no, that's I don't like. I even never got to the bottom of the well with the Marketing Over Coffee site. There was some rogue podcasting tool from some, I don't even know where it came from. I do have one suspicion that I can't throw under the bus. But yeah, if you're getting like 5,000 hits a day from some server, it ended up being like, an extra $200 a month that I had to pull the plug on the domain. And actually, because even blocking it at the DNS level, it was still thousands of hits. And so we're still getting charged for it. So that's one of those classic things too, where none of the companies involved really care too much about fixing it because everybody's getting paid on it. So it's, but yeah, this is critical for that too. And denial of service, right? This is always like the stock solution that people talk about for denial of service. It's like, no, you need to be using a service like this. So if you're ever under attack, they can, they already know who the bad actors are. And isn't there even dynamic response to that? Like, won't it say, oh, wait a minute, if you're getting like 100 times what you normally get in a day, we need to start doing something?
Yeah, so you'll get alerts, and then also there's a whole switch here. It says under attack mode.
Oh, yeah.
Hit the panic button.
Raise shields.
Exactly. And so what happens with that is that everyone who visits your website gets greeted with a CAPTCHA first, and then they have to fill out the CAPTCHA before they can access your website. So it's obviously not something you want to leave turned on, but if you're just getting stormed, you just put the shields up and buckle down.
Yeah, right. Because if you're in that place where everybody's timing out, like they're getting absolutely nothing, yeah, I can see that can save the day for you.
Exactly. The one other thing, though, I think is important to mention is that it's not a cure for a poorly set up web server. So if your company has web servers and stuff and IT that is not super great, this will like plaster over many sins, but the underlying IT things are still things you need to fix. It's not going to make it's lipstick on a pig. It's not going to make the pig look any better at his cart.
Yeah. So what kind of mistakes would people make that would fall into that? Because obviously it's replicating whatever you've got. So if you're doing something wrong, it's replicating it doesn't solve anything. But what kind of mistakes do you see people usually making?
The biggest one is, at least with like the Apache web server, is setting up the wrong kind of multi-threading, which means that your server can only handle a certain number of people, knocking on the door, and then it crashes. This is a problem that I've actually had with regular, just like a Linux box that I've commissioned, and I configured it wrong. I set the wrong kind of multi-threading, and it turned on, it ran, and then immediately just shut down. And then I get a little notification from Linode saying, hey, your server, is like 300% of CPU capacity. And that's the kind of thing is for, if you have web servers in particular, but also email servers where maybe IT isn't the best at what they do, this will definitely take the load off, but it will not stop the underlying problem, which is you have a badly configured server. And that's something that, again, it's one of those things that's really challenging. It impacts marketing, but it's not marketing's responsibility. And yet we have to find a way to work with IT so that we get what we need as marketers, and deliver good customer experiences, even though it's not something that's under our control.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from now, because it's a matter of you're just delaying that problem. Like, you could set it up and having caching will delay that, but eventually you're still going to hit that ceiling and then you're dead in the water.
Exactly. And it's one of those things like, your average marketer is not going to go to IT and say, hey, are we using FPM or FastCGI on our Apache server? Right? That's probably not a question that's going to happen all that often.
Yeah, no, this is again the argument for, you should be bringing beer on Friday to the IT department and keeping them happy so they take your calls when things get weird.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like my background is in IT. I was in IT first before I was in marketing. So I know a lot of the technical underpinnings of this stuff, and that's, I know to ask those questions. A lot of folks don't have that same experience.
Yeah, no, it's totally, CMS is about as deep as you go. You're just expecting those servers to work all the time.
Exactly. So that's, again, I think every single website that handles more than one visitor needs some kind of intermediary, whether it's Cloudflare or MaxCDN or Akamai or whoever. You need something that provides that level of security, that provides that speed increase, and provides services like Google with optimized versions of your site so that you're painted in the best light to them. And if you don't have those things, again, Cloudflare has a free plan, and it's what we run. It's good enough. We might upgrade one of these days because some of the things like the image compression is something I want to play with. I noticed in our most recent Search Console reports that a couple of our pages are getting flagged for large images. So I want to see if I turn that on, then I don't have to redo all the images on the Trust Insights website.
Yeah, no, that's, and having to run reports, figure out where all the big graphics are. No, I can say, and with Google, mobile first and Search Console, nicking you when you don't have the right size graphics. Yeah, no, that's a quick solution to the problem, which is fantastic.
Exactly. So that's the nutshell. If you'd like to learn more about some of the Search Console stuff I was talking about, here's the shameless plug for our Search Console course. We also have a new course on Google Analytics 4. But any parting thoughts, John?
No, I think that's pretty solid. I mean, again, this is something you should be doing if you're a marketer. If you don't know what's going on with this, get to IT and start asking some questions, because you can save yourself a whole lot of headache.
And bring beer. All right, folks, we will see you all next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.